Growing up, I never owned a PlayStation 3. Even to this day, with my collection of retro consoles and games ever growing, I've never had the opportunity to get my hands on one. Given that neither me or my family were made of money back in the mid-2010s, it's not surprising that we ended up with the Xbox 360 in our home instead. I did, of course, end up with a lifelong love of Microsoft's own exclusives at the time, especially the Halo series. The point is, while I've never owned anything PS3 related, the exclusives being released for the system at the time always seemed to spark such imagination in my mind. Little Big Planet, Metal Gear Solid, Uncharted, The Last of Us, and one made by my beloved Sly Cooper developers, Infamous. Seeing others online at the time playing through these insanely creative and just downright fun-looking games always made me want to give them a try myself. Maybe it was a grass is always greener situation, but the envy was there. And no game made me want to try out the PS3 more than Journey. I'm not sure what drew me in so much, but something about the first few images and videos of the game captivated me like nothing had before. I yearned for some way to try out the game for myself, and that yearning paid off when we purchased a PS4. And on one fateful sick day from school, with some meager money I was able to save up, I was able to buy the collector's edition of the game, which also included Flow and Flower, the two previous games made by that game company. Ever since, I've played and replayed the games well over a dozen times. I was, and frankly still am, enthralled by this game. The world building, the environments, the colors, the music, all of it works together seamlessly to create a beautiful experience. It is, in its truest sense, a masterpiece. So, in honor of this game's legacy and my personal love for the game, we're going to be taking a detailed look through every aspect of it, level by level. From collectibles and achievements to glitches, Easter eggs, and every small detail I can get my hands on. We'll leave no stone unturned and no sand dune untraveled. If you're ready, we'll take this journey together. Our story begins back in the year 2006 with our lead creative director, Genova Chen. He was deep into playing World of Warcraft at the time, but began falling out of it. Being so busy with his schooling, he struggled with his social life, so he looked for relationships online. He had a desire to really connect emotionally with the people he found himself playing with. Unfortunately, he found it hard to do so when most of the other players were focused on strategies and the most optimal builds. In his own words, "The more I played this game, the more people I encountered, the more I realized I had no connection with any of these people. They just reminded me that I'm a lonely person." That disappointment was the catalyst that sparked Journey's creation. Chen envisioned an online space where those deeper connections could be forged. One without enemies or equipment, a game where your age, your gender, or even the language you speak doesn't matter. One where you can focus on the fact that we're all humans, and truly bond with a complete stranger, where the actions you take are what help forge real companionship. Originally, he imagined the game as an MMO, where everyone set out their own goals and created their own experiences. Of course, that vision of the game never came to be, but the idea was revisited in one of his later projects, Sky, Children of the Light. While in school, Chen met and befriended Keely Santiago, another student who was in the same academic program. Together, the two of them, alongside a team of 5 others, worked together to create their first game, Cloud, as a funded research project from the University of Southern California's Game Innovation Lab. The game was a huge success and caught the eye of Sony. Soon after the two graduated, they formed that game company and signed a contract with Sony to produce 3 new titles for their up-and-coming PlayStation network. 2 of these games were the previously mentioned Flow and Flower, but the third ended up being Journey. Thinking back to that feeling he had while playing Warcraft, Chen decided that now would be the time that they would tackle an online experience. Though the vision of the game had been set out many years prior, development of the game was still quite rocky. Unfortunately, if you know anything about game creation, this won't come as too much of a surprise. Sony expected development of the game to only take about a year's time, but due to the developers having too many ideas and due to the size of their studio over doubling from 17 to 18 people, the game had to be delayed several times. In fact, by the time the game finally released, that game company was effectively bankrupt. Several employees even went without pay until the sales revenue started coming in. I highly recommend that guy Glenn's video on Journey's development troubles if you're interested in more. I'll leave a link in the description. Thankfully, when the game did come out, it was met with critical and financial success. It became the fastest selling game on the PlayStation Store to date. The game received countless amounts of praise, and was even nominated for and won several awards throughout 2013. Clearly, their struggle was worth it in the end. So why don't we properly dive in and see what we ended up with. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly talk about the version of the game you'll be seeing. Journey has been released and re-released several times, including a brief time when it was an Epic Games Store exclusive for the PC release of the game. The version you'll be seeing is from the Steam version, which was released back in 2020. There are some differences between this port, created by Annapurna. I'm gonna fuck up that name every single time I try to say it. I want to say Annapurna, but it's not it's Annapurna.
What?
No, Annapurna. Annapurna! God. There are some differences between this port, created by Annapurna, and the original 2013 release, namely glitches and some content from the original PS3 version of the game that didn't make it into the final port. We'll talk about that in a second, but while we're talking about developers, one thing I neglected to notice after all these years is that the co-developers of Journey were the external development group from Santa Monica Studios. You may know them as the creators of the God of War franchise. Though the team that worked on Journey was more focused on helping up-and-coming indie developers rather than the god-punching simulator that the rest of their studio was producing. It's always really cool hearing how collaborative different studios are with one another. Talented people sharing their skills and art with one another to make insanely memorable experiences. It reminds me a lot of the almost sibling bond of two of Sony's other subsidiaries, Naughty Dog and Insomniac, though that's definitely a story for another day. In any case, while I do believe that the Steam version is the definitive and the most easily accessible version of the game, I've taken the time to mod out some bugs. All of the mods are an attempt to bring back some missing features lost in the port. For example, a lot of the musical tracks in the PC port don't loop properly, and would leave you playing in silence. There's also an issue of missing instruments that should be added to the score when playing co-op with someone online. It's kind of similar to the Super Mario series when riding Yoshi. They add a bongo to the background music, and it's a really nice touch. Another example is the sun. In the original PlayStation 3 version, the texture for the sun had this almost painted look to it, which is completely missing in the Steam version. I've taken the time to add both of these back into the game using mods. While I don't believe the mods are necessary to appreciate the core experience of the game, it does bring it back closer in line with the original, if that makes a difference to you. Alright, now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at the menu. It's your typical affair: start, options, quit, but what I love about it is that the background is actually already in the game. I love when hitting start brings you straight into the world. No load screen, no nothing. So, why don't we? These opening shots do a lot to get us into the right headspace for what we're about to play. The way the light glitters off the sand, the shimmers of heat over the field, the way the music builds into this dramatic crescendo, only for it to drop out once we lay eyes on our player. This game really knows how to set the atmosphere. That being said, this is us. There's no official name for most of the characters and creatures in Journey. During development, the artists referred to what would become their final design internally as the Cloth Ninja, but also mentions fans dubbing them as the Traveler or Pilgrim. They even have a note in the art book that mentions that Japanese players refer to the player as Tabibito-san, which roughly translates as cute Mr. Journeyman, which is just so charming. The English community has taken to calling them Wayfarers, which is the term I'll be using going forward. When possible, I'll be using names the members of the Journey wiki and Discord use for names to be consistent. That extends to the names of levels as well, which we'll cover in a bit. I will, however, make note of names used internally within the game, as most of them are interesting in their own right. After following a few prompts to gain our bearing, we can stand up and begin to explore around. Naturally, the game wants us to walk up the hill to begin the game, but we are free to wander around the starting area. There's not anything of real note here besides the sheer size of the desert surrounding us. It just seems to stretch out for miles in every direction. Walking too far away, though, is a problem, so a powerful gust of wind whips up and knocks us completely over. Many of the levels in the game have similar wind walls to prevent the player from leaving out of bounds. It's a creative take on level boundaries, opting for an in-universe wall rather than an invisible one. Don't worry, by the end of the series, these walls won't hold me. We can head back to where we started and finally walk over the hill. Once we do, we're greeted with one of the greatest title screens in gaming. It gives me goosebumps every time. The violin underscoring the scene, and the awe-inspiring, almost intimidating view of our ultimate goal, the mountain. I love that the game presents you with this moment. And much like the title screen, all of this is done in-game, really grounding you into the moment. Heading down the hill, we run into these markers that dot the landscape. There's no letters or names on them, possibly rubbed off by the blowing sands. Pressing forward, we see a small raised platform with some sort of glowing object sitting on top of it. Stepping our way up, we see that we're not alone out here in the dunes. These are called flyers. These fluttering little fellows are the most common of the cloth-like creatures we'll be encountering on our way up the mountain. They always fly around together in groups, so you'll never see one by itself. Their shape and color remind me a lot of red envelopes unmarried people would receive during Lunar New Year, but are probably more closely inspired by Tibetan prayer flags, though this is just speculation on my end, so take what I say with a grain of salt. If you've ever seen videos or pictures of Tibet, or from people climbing Mount Everest, you might have seen these flags before. Now, I'm not Tibetan, nor am I an expert in their traditions and beliefs, but from what I gather, the idea is to print prayers or mantras onto these colorful strips of cloth, each representing different elements, and then hang them up as high as you can. The wind then carries these prayers and blessings along and helps purify surrounding areas. And of course, the higher you place them, the more wind, and by extension, the more of an area that can be affected by the prayers, making mountains a perfect place for them. And seeing as we're heading towards a mountain ourselves, it's not hard to see the connection. Collecting the illuminated calligraphy in front of us, we're met with one of the game's main mechanics. We have a scarf now. After spontaneously growing our newest fashion trend, we walk up to the flyers and some of them will fly down to us. They fill our scarf with some kind of light, and with that light, we're able to flap our cape out and fly for a short distance. This will be our main way of traversing the world of Journey. For now, we can only fly very short distances before we need to find more flyers. But as we collect more of these symbols, called symbols, we are able to extend the length of our newly acquired cape to crazy long lengths. They are very much worth your time to pick up. So we'll be going over the locations of all the symbols as we come across them. For now though, I think it's time that we continue forward and see what lies ahead. Following the small group of flyers and rebels along the ground, we come across a huge ruined structure. We'll come back to this area in just a bit, but first I want to take us off the beaten trail for a moment. There's another small set of flyers off to our right we can continue walking towards, and as we do, we come across a smaller building, crumbled and half buried in the sand. Heading inside, we find more of the markers and a blank wall. Walking closer, the game prompts us to press a circle button. Doing so, we let out a chirp. Chirps are our main method of interacting with the world. You let out small musical notes, a symbol appears, and a bubble grows around us. Quickly pressing the button will send out short and small chirps, but as you hold down the button longer, you'll let out bigger and more powerful bubbles. Doing so here will light up the surrounding markers with their own symbols, and cause the wall to transform into a mural. These are ancient glyphs. They're another optional collectible within the game that shed more light onto the story and lore that the game is presenting us. These walls are notorious for being well hidden throughout the game's world, so we'll be going over the location of these as well through our journey. The glyph in front of us actually gives us some interesting insight as to where we are right now. The mural shows many of the markers we've been walking past here, alongside more than a dozen figures who look just like us lying underneath. Looking back at it now, it's quite clear. What we've been walking past are gravestones. In fact, internally, this level is actually referred to as Graveyard, which I actually find to be a better name than the one we ended up with, but that's just me. It does beg the question of why we woke up here of all places. Questions I'm sure we'll answer in time. Now then, back on track. If we head to the left, we can jump out of the building and head towards the ruins. One thing you might have noticed while we've been traveling is that occasionally we slide down parts of the hills. Whenever you're on a steep enough slope, the wayfarer will start to glide down the hill like they're on a big sandy slip and slide, though I'd imagine that would be quite unpleasant. Now that we're at the ruins proper, I'd like to take a moment to look around. A fun detail I found interesting about the buildings themselves is how ancient they really look, noting that the stones and metals look as though they're hundreds or even thousands of years old. While we're walking, we'll find even more flyers floating around, but also that there seems to be some flyers trapped in some sort of cage. Well, that's not going to fly by me, no sir. Let's see if we can find some way to set them free. Taking in the area we're in, there's a lot of these small buildings dotted around the perimeter, locked up with these gates in front of them. Jumping way ahead, these buildings here are actually the different chapters of the game. Once you finish the game, you're able to come back here and select a chapter to replay by just walking inside. This is why the level is actually called Chapter Select by the community. Backtracking just a bit, we can find another curious area, one with another glowing sigil and a bunch of blank ones all lined up next to each other. It's not very notable just yet, but if we go collect our other two symbols, we'll find something quite interesting. Speaking of which, if we head down towards the flyers nearby, we can gather just enough energy to fly ourselves up onto this pillar and collect ourselves our second symbol. Then, if we head towards the center and start climbing these broken pieces, we can walk around the side and jump the small gap, snag ourselves our last symbol of the level. Now, if we take a look at the blank spots, we'll notice that 2 more have been filled out. This area shows you all the symbols you've collected throughout all the levels of the game. It's extremely handy if you're going in blind and trying to figure out where you've missed symbols. For now though, we're just getting started. Heading back down now, let's take a shortcut back to the center. If we come up to these flyers and hold down our chirp, the flyers will rush towards us and give us a small lift, and we can use that to skip climbing back up. The more flyers we have when we chirp, the higher we'll go. Heading to the top now, we have these tattered ribbons that seem to glow when we get near them. I don't know if a lot of people activate the ribbons this way, but you can just walk into them to fully light them up. The more common way is to chirp at them. I love being able to watch big crowds of flyers. It's like watching a flock of birds or a huge school of fish swim around. Heading back to the cages, we can see that the flyers trapped inside did indeed get freed, though strangely these 4 stayed put. I guess they just didn't meet the requirements for parole. One last thing before we finish off here. If we take a brief second to stand still, our wayfarer will begin to sit down. You can also make them sit down by hitting the select button. If you wait long enough while sitting, or by hitting the pause button, we'll be greeted to some cinematic sweeping shots of the area we're in. You can do this at any time while playing, so I'll be sure to show them off during each of the levels. Now that the flyers are free, we can use them to glide ourselves onto the other side of the broken bridge and head towards this glowing light, which turns out to be a statue. These are Ancestor Sphinx. These will be what we're trying to reach at the end of most of the levels. Fun fact, according to Matt Nava, the game's art director, the Sphinx was one of the few designs in the game that took no time at all to come up with, and was inspired, of course, by the Egyptian Sphinx and owl hieroglyphics that give the appearance of having wisdom. Walking towards it lights up one of the markers. Again, I'm not sure if people do this, but I really enjoy not chirping to activate these. Doing so makes the Sphinx light up and causes a glowing circle to appear on the ground. Before we see what that's about, let's take note of the bottom of the Sphinx. Just like the other symbols, these represent the collected symbols for the current level you're in. They're useful for making sure you don't leave without one. As well, looking closer at the lit up Sphinx, we can see characters unlike any we've seen so far. As far as I'm aware, these characters aren't used anywhere else in the game besides these Sphinxes. Sphinxes? Sphinxi? I don't know how you... whatever. In any case, let's see what this light's all about. These sections are some of my favorite in the game. These meditations are called history lessons, and are how most of the game's exposition and lore are given to us. And they do so in the style of the ancient Glyphs, which is such a creative choice for storytelling. Before that though, we have a cloaked figure here with us, who seems to be recounting the story for us. We don't get to see their appearance just yet, so that's just another mystery to add to the pile. The mural starts with the mountain shining light from its summit, and creating the symbols that we've been seeing all around the place. These symbols seem to drift down and create plants and animals, and eventually, people. The people then gather the symbols together and use them to create the red cloth. We even see what looks like flyers overhead, and that's where the story ends for now. For as little context as we're given, it does seem to give us answers to some of our questions. For one, we know that indeed, all the cloth creatures we've been interacting with are in fact alive. As well, we know that people did used to live here, and they're the ones who created them. It also gives us a reason to be heading towards the mountain itself. It has some sort of power to create these symbols that grant things life. In that way, it's almost like a god or a deity, but it's pretty unclear as of right now. But at least we know if we continue walking towards the mountain, we will find answers. With that, the door blocking our way forward opens, and we're finished with the first level. What an engaging opening. I know some people aren't too keen about this first level, and I can see why. At first, it's a lot of meandering around trying to figure out what's going on and what you're supposed to be doing. But I think that's part of the charm. In interviews with Chen, he talks a lot about how the story and structure of the game mirrors that of the journey from birth to death, as well as several other parallels he baked into the theming of the game. To that end, this opening reflects birth, and now things are starting to make a lot more sense. Waking up at a strange place, not knowing what's going on or where to go, and this feeling doesn't go away really until another older figure, perhaps some sort of parental figure, shows us the world and how things work. It's subtle, but the themes are there, and because of that, I can't bring myself to dislike this level as a whole, even if it is a bit rudimentary on your first playthrough. That does it for level 1. Next time we meet, we'll be mending some broken bridges. Thank you all so much for watching. This is kind of my first time doing any sort of project like this, or any sort of video work, so I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you know when the next episode comes out, and like the video so that I know that everybody appreciated my work. Until next time, and goodbye forever.